This is episode 17 of the podcast Communicate Like This. Episode 17 is titled Belief, Execution, and Hot Buttons. Today we're going to dive in more with actually executing on the core values and principles that are remembered using the acronym ACE Artist. Just as an aside, can you recite the 9 core values and principles represented by that acronym in 60 seconds? If not, keep working towards that goal. Again, if you aren't aware of what those CVPs are, then there's no way that you can make them effective in your life to reduce stress, arguments, misunderstandings, and miscommunication. The way I want you to approach this is to look at the situation of an actual yelling match between two people. Ever been involved in one of those? For most, if not all of us, the answer is yes. Did you really get the outcome you wanted at the end of a yelling match? For most, if not all of us, the answer is no. Logically, if a particular method of communication isn't working for you, then why employ that tactic? This becomes really perplexing to me why people continually go down the same street day after day and run over the same pothole without either choosing a different street or making better efforts to avoid the pothole when driving down that street. Ever see the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray? One of my top 10 all-time favorite movies and highly recommended. I've seen it multiple times and still laugh at the same things. It never gets old for me, which is kind of ironic when you consider the plot of the movie itself. Anyway, in the movie, Bill Murray steps off a curb into a pothole on the street that's filled with icy, slushy water up to his shin. And he does this many, many times before he finally learns to avoid it. It takes him a long time to finally train himself to avoid it, but when it becomes too much of an annoyance to him, he finally puts his mind to work and executes on his desire to avoid the pothole. That's a matter of true prioritization. One of those CVPs in the acronym ACE Artist. Bill Murray finally executes one of the CVPs, or core values and principles, by turning it into an action. Yes, from Marshawn Lynch, it's all about that action, boss. A little sidetrack about execution. I was once on a call at work when an engineering vice president was talking on and on about making sure that we had proper execution with this and proper execution with that. I piped up on the call and said that execution seemed like a pretty drastic step to take if things weren't going right, and that we should probably try to coach up those people first before executing them. Now that went over his head, but I thought it was pretty clever, and the comment did get some chuckles from others on the call. That's a total sidetrack, so let's get back to it. Let's look at how a yelling match is associated with CVPs, or core values and principles. You know, most people, when asked if they believe in integrity, would stand up and say, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to argue with the concept of doing what you say you will do, and doing it by when you say you'll do it. If you ask people if they have integrity, most will probably say yes. Kind of like respect and accountability. Those are really positive principles, and it's hard to argue against them. The same can be said for all of the other core values and principles involved in ACE Artist. Kind of like arguing against mom and apple pie. I mean, who doesn't believe in those things? The twist, though, comes when they're actually executed, or maybe more accurately, aren't executed. Do your words match your actions? One of the goals of Communicate Like This is to put those two more in alignment. Now let's take that neutral, third-party, out-of-body observer perspective of a yelling match and see what's really what. Let's start with the first A in ACE Artist, actions in alignment with principles. Yelling means that your actions or your behavior are out of alignment with every single one of the CVPs, as I'll discuss. What thought have you given to that relative to the type of communication that you really want to have with people? Does the thought that you're yelling simply doesn't match what you're trying to achieve ever enter your mind? If not, why not? You've got bigger fish to fry in that you're trying to get better at effective communication, which is why you're listening to this podcast. What's the bigger picture? What's your North Star? If you're really and truly engaged in trying to improve yourself, then yelling simply can't be a part of the equation because it doesn't match up with all of the other CVPs that we've been talking about. Now, you probably started yelling for some good reason, at least in your mind at that point in time. Somehow, someone pushed your hot button, and your hot button is wired in your brain to start yelling. Understand that reaction isn't inherent in you. It's likely not a part of your genetic makeup. More likely, it was learned over time by observing how others in your life as you were growing up reacted to certain things, and you just started copying them. An important concept to remember in that, what is learned can be unlearned with the right approach and diligence. The proverbial they say it takes 21 days of not doing a habit in order to truly break the habit. The point is that habits can be unlearned because they were learned all along the way, even if you didn't make a conscious effort to learn them. So that hot button that you've maybe unconsciously wired to your brain to start yelling in certain situations can be unwired and rewired. It might be hard, but you can do it if you truly prioritize rewiring your hot button. For example, let's say you've wired your hot button to connect to your brain to flip off drivers who almost cause an accident with you on the road. After all, you don't have to put up with that crap. You need to stand up for yourself and your safety. Your life is on the line with lousy drivers. And what better way to make their incompetence known than to flip them off? Well, I'll tell you a better way. Instead of flipping them off, try rewiring your hot button. What if you simply moved out of their way by moving to another lane or otherwise increasing your safety bubble around your car relative to them? You can still mumble to yourself about what a lousy, careless, unsafe driver they are, but the action you take will not only increase your safety by increasing your safety bubble space, but will not inflame the situation into one of road rage. That is a proverbial win-win. Hey, I just realized that I've used the word proverbial twice in this podcast. Well, now actually 3 times. This must be some 50-cent level stuff you're listening to. Maybe I should charge more. Back to it. Let's move on to the C in ACE Artist. Continuous improvement. By yelling, neither of you are improving with the interaction. In fact, you're getting worse by practicing unfavorable, inefficient, and unproductive behavior. Is yelling really solving the business issue? Or is it creating even more problems like longer-term bad feelings that you'll have to deal with later when you both get back on an even keel? Now, that's assuming that you even want to be around this person long-term and that you're yelling in the heat of the moment. Maybe the yelling, especially if a frequent behavior, means you both should just walk away from each other, all things being equal. You're not continuously improving with yelling. You continuously improve by not yelling. The E is effective communication. Clearly, yelling is not more effective in resolving business issues and just leads to more resentment and more disrespect. Remember that picture I described in episode 13? It was about an interaction on the sidelines of a football game where the player, Richard Sherman, was literally screaming in his coach's face after the play while the coach just stood there impassively. It's a very impactful picture, and if a picture was worth 1,000 words, that one certainly is. Clearly, there was not 50-50 communication taking place, meaning that it's 50% sender and 50% receiver to give you 100% effective communication. It clearly was only imparting information to someone instead of listening. It really was more of a short-term stress relief for one person, Richard Sherman, the sender, but it undoubtedly created more stress in the receiver of the information, that being the coach. With this one-way communication process, The long-term effects are detrimental to the overall relationship. Keep this picture in mind and see if that's how you want to live your personal life and work life day after day. How do you think you'd like to have this imposed on you day after day? It's not a pretty picture. You might go on Google and search for a picture of Richard Sherman and Chris with a K, Richard, who is the Seahawks coach. And I don't know if it'll pop up. I just thought of it now. So you might give that a shot if you want to see the actual picture. Or drop me a note and with your email address, and I can send you a copy of the picture. It's really very powerful and impactful. The A in artist is accountability. So in the heat of the battle, it's likely that you're simply blaming the other person entirely, either in your head or overtly in your yelling. Effective communication, again, is 50% sender, 50% receiver. So be accountable for your 50% and stop yelling and move to the business issue that needs to be resolved. Have the awareness that you're yelling and force yourself to stop, take a breath, and refocus on what the business issue is that you're having the disagreement about. Remember that I'm using the term business issue here as shorthand for whatever issue or topic it is that you're trying to resolve in your personal life or in your business life. Train yourself to think in terms of business issues to trigger a reset in your brain about what you're really talking about. The R in the artist is respect. It's obvious that when you're yelling at someone, you aren't respecting them. Instead, you're just trying to dominate them with the plan of the loudest voice wins, come hell or high water. You're trying to force them to comply. You want to control them. You're not considering or accommodating or even really listening to them in the slightest. It's certainly not respectful. It is a childish approach. You're better than that. Stop yelling. The first T in ACE artist is true prioritization. The business issue should be the priority, the topic that you actually started talking about in the first place. But now you've both moved away from that into making the priority to verbally beat down the other person into submission. Your priorities are out of whack by definition, since you've committed yourself to CVPs, core values and principles, for your long-term efforts in more effectively communicating and reducing stress, reducing arguments, reducing misunderstandings, and reducing miscommunication. Integrity is the letter I. It's likely that the start of the yelling is that one or the other of you hasn't done what you said you would do when you said you would do it, which is the definition of integrity. Take accountability for that and then figure out how to not do that again. Do what you say you will do. That will stop arguments from starting in the first place. Simplification is the S in ACE artist. Your yelling isn't accomplishing a resolution of the business issue. It's only creating another problem that has to be dealt with. Look at how many people are involved in this meeting that could be productively doing other things. Therefore, it'll take you longer to resolve the business issue, meaning that you've unnecessarily complicated the process by introducing many inefficiencies into the resolution. It's the opposite of simplification. The second T in ACE artist is teamwork. The opposite of teamwork if you're yelling at someone. The other person is probably shutting you down and not listening to the real business issue that you're trying to deal with, assuming that you're even trying to talk about the business issue at that point. You've both lost control, making the whole interaction ineffective and inefficient. What a waste of valuable time. I want to go a bit out of the main focus of this podcast, which is being able to help you make your personal life better. From a business or work perspective, at some companies, I've introduced a couple of other CVPs to add to the ones that we just talked about. The first one is a healthy business. That not being limited to just financials, but to include the culture. how happy people are to come to work, whether they stay, whether they grow while they're at work. Employees observing a yelling match between two other employees, particularly if the other employees are management, are made uncomfortable at a minimum and likely lose a degree of respect for both of the yelling parties. Employees model the example of leaders, so now those leaders have communicated to others that this type of unproductive behavior is acceptable. So what do you think that those employees are going to do when they run into an issue, when they run into a disagreement with someone else? Of course, they're going to model their leaders and start yelling, which creates an unhealthy business environment. The other CVP that I introduce is customer and employee satisfaction. Now, others observing you won't be satisfied or think this is a good place to work when people are treated with disrespect. It'll encourage them to seek a better place to work. You yourselves, involved in the yelling, also won't be satisfied by being yelled at. Few people like to be yelled at, so why do it? Put yourself in the other person's shoes as well as your own. So in summary, your awareness of the core values and principles and what they actually mean and translate into when it comes to your actions and behavior are critical to being successful in effective communication. It's easy to gloss over the CVPs as just a list of words if you don't understand the fundamental nature of them. If you don't have the fundamentals in place first, anything that you try to do that involves them will come up short. And the CVPs are involved in virtually every aspect of effective communication. That's why they're so important. Basically because they are foundational in nature. So pay attention to them, understand them, know them, and be aware of them when you're communicating. You may have figured out that I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan by now, mostly from my references to Marshawn Lynch, Pete Carroll, and Richard Sherman. Sherm, if you're listening, I still love you, even though you deserted us for the 49ers. But here's a quote from another Seahawk, their Hall of Famer-to-be linebacker Bobby Wagner. The quote is relevant to today's discussion because one of those reasons that disagreements start and then turn into yelling matches is that common trait of humanity of needing to be right. That's why one of the tools you've learned is to enter any conversation with the belief that you may be wrong. It's kind of a technique to drive humbleness or humility in your brain. Bobby Wagner said, and here's the quote that got me thinking about this, "You think when two people are talking, someone has to be right or wrong. And I think two people can just have a conversation." That's really the goal, and it sums it up pretty well. To keep at just a conversation, keep your awareness level on high alert about your and the other person's emotions. In the Perkyverse, as some of my friends call the world that I live in, because sometimes it is a kind of a Pollyanna optimistic approach to the world, logic trumps everything. Emotions don't count in making decisions. If you're a Star Trek, and that's not a Star Wars, but a Star Trek fan, it's like being a Vulcan. Of course, and I'm giving you a spoiler alert if you haven't yet watched the Star Trek movies and want to, so you might fast forward a few seconds and I'll pause to give you that opportunity. But the planet Vulcan was destroyed in one of the movies. So much for logic triumphing. The entire planet of logical people was destroyed. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, I'm sure. Staying focused on the business issue helps avoid arguments, and being aware that you need to stay focused on the real topic at hand is valuable. If you sense yourself getting emotional, try to move more towards logic or that out-of-body experience of a neutral third-party objective observer. Remember, when tensions rise, have that awareness that tensions are rising. Stop the conversation and ask, what's the business issue we're trying to address? or words to that effect in a more social context, but bring it back to the original topic that you started out with instead of being sidetracked and going off on tangents that end up in a yelling match. That's it for today. No Elvis today, but I'm curious if you liked that touch from the last episode. Give me some feedback. We're a team helping each other on this effective communication journey, and I'm learning a lot from the feedback you've been providing. It's very appreciative, and I thank you for that. Keep the feedback coming. Also, please clue in your friends and business colleagues about the podcast and send them to www.communicatelikethis.com to get with the program. We'll all be better off for it. Remember that if you'd like to bring these concepts to your work and make the 1/3 of your day that you experience away from home healthier and more productive, you can always go to my website at www.theopendoorgroup.com to explore the possibilities for your business. But I'd be remiss to not paraphrase the noted philosopher Marshawn Lynch at the end of this episode. So remember, it's all about that action, boss. Talk to you next time.